Alright, so this video is addressed partially to Rel and partially to the greater PlanetSide community, mostly because it's going to be talking about changes that Rel thought was important, but also thought that community's perspective on them was important. So without further ado, let's go into each change. So the first change I want to talk about is making Nanite Auto Repair default across all vehicles. Now this is something we talked about doing last week. The idea is, with engagement radar being default and comp armor getting a buff to ESF nose gun resistance, vehicle stealth and comp armor are going to be these really viable, interesting direct upgrades in the defensive slot, but they're going to be competing with Nanite Auto Repair, which is basically a quality of life upgrade. Basically, players are going to be faced with a decision, do I want to get rid of Nanite Auto Repair and have to land in order to heal, or in order to have these direct combat upgrades, or, do I go with Nanite Auto Repair and put myself at a disadvantage? I don't think that's a very interesting choice, and I talked about that with Rel in the last podcast of Under the Radar, just a podcast about air that I do, and he was a guest on. Go ahead and check it out. It'll be in the description. We talked about that, and we were all pretty much in the same boat of, yeah, Nanite Auto Repair is more of a quality of life ability. It should probably be default across all vehicles. It doesn't help a hell of a lot in combat. One thing in particular Rel asked me to do was to create a topic on Nanite Auto Repair and see what the community thinks of that. I didn't do that per se, but based on the comments we got from the last podcast, if you don't think Nanite Auto Repair should be default, you should probably speak up, because you have literally not been represented in any way. Every single person who's commented has said, agreed with the points we made in the last podcast, that Nanite Auto Repair should be default across all vehicles, with a couple variations of how. But in general, I think people have been basically 100% agreement. So Rel's also in the same boat. He was saying that he just basically needs to present the case to the devs, and the more community support he has, the easier it is for him. So I would encourage everyone to just, and I hope I'm not misquoting him there, but I would encourage everyone to sort of take to the comments with your opinions on Nanite Auto Repair, especially if you've seen the previous podcast. The second thing I want to talk about is a hover button. Now, the hover button is sort of an interesting change. It's sort of a big change, and it's definitely one of the more complicated ones. The idea behind the hover button was to make it so that you don't have to know the reverse maneuver to do well in PlanetSide Air anymore. The idea was it would sort of be like a reverse maneuver button. Basically, you would press X and your thrusters would lock all the time. The issue behind that is that there are sort of complicated things that you do when you're in hover that are tricky and that are part of the fun, one would argue. Basically things like trying to use gravity to keep your thrusters locked, using the right motions, and stuff like that. And you may not want to take away from that. And a hover button that just always worked could take away from that. But upon making that point, I actually heard from a lot of newer players and a couple of aces as well that no, they thought actually that having a hover button would let them do more. They could do movements that they couldn't make before in hover, and it would actually make flight potentially even more interesting. And I thought, okay, well, I mean, I can't really argue that unless we were to see it on test. There's really no way of knowing. And so I would recommend actually putting a hover button, if it's possible to do a hover button, just a button that locks your thrusters. You press it once, it locks your thrusters, you press it again, it unlocks them. I would recommend actually just putting that on test and seeing what aces in particular think of it. The reason why I say aces and not newer players as well is because newer players are sort of coming at this from the perspective of how easy it is to learn, and we're already probably going to be making concessions for newer players by adding engagement radar and potentially reverse maneuver buttons being very heavily looked at right now. And those are the right places, in my opinion, to make concessions. I think they lower the skill ceiling the least and lower the skill floor the most. But core hover fighting is not necessarily the right place to be doing that, in my opinion. That's sort of the core of what makes pro players pilots like hovering, and the flight model in general. I don't want to risk compromising that, so I'd be way more interested on, just in this specific case, to hear from aces on, is this more fun? And if it's both more fun and more accessible to newer players, then I think it's a good change. If not, I did hear another suggestion on a hover button that it was very good, and then I thought was very interesting. This is sort of a softer solution. I think it would act as a very good reverse maneuver button. I think it would make it so you don't need to know the reverse maneuver, but it would still keep the sort of skill of hover in the game. And the suggestion, credit to Jennifer for coming up with this. The suggestion I heard was to have it on a cast system, where it's a cooldown based ability. Basically, you press the button and it'll lock your thrusters for 3 seconds on a 15-second cooldown. Except you get 3 casts, and every 15 seconds one cast will replenish. Which means that you can do it multiple times in a row, and every now and then you'll get another one added to how much you can do it. The reverse maneuver would be the ideal time to press this button. It would literally be the best, like in a situation where you need to do a reverse maneuver would be the optimal time to use this button. So I don't think there are a lot of situations, especially since in doing a reverse maneuver you would have to have been flying fixed wing for a while, so you probably haven't pressed the button in a while, which means it's probably off cooldown. I think that is a situation where this ability would always be off cooldown for you if you need to do a reverse maneuver. And it would also potentially let you cheat the current physics a little bit if you make a mistake, or if you want to do something that you can't potentially do now. And that could also make things interesting as well. I think they're both really good ideas, and I would really recommend putting them both on test and seeing what people think of them, if there really is an easy button for each ability. That's my opinion on it. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. And that is it. I'm going to be streaming after this video goes up. If you want to ask me about my thoughts on any of these changes, let me know, and I will put the stream in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.